While Trump's tariffs wreak havoc on Wall Street, the new duties also paving the way to reshaping global trade. Here with more on the fallout from the Trump's trade policies, we have Ian Bremmer, founder and president of Eurasia Group and G0 Media. Ian, good to see you. So a question top of mind for investors now, Ian, is what comes next with these new Trump tariffs, and specifically how our trading partners are going to react. Are we going to see negotiation? Is it going to be retaliation? We had a guest on earlier in the show, Ian, who said, listen, he expects negotiation with what he described as he's looking for symbolic retaliation. Is that how you see it?
Depends on the country. But before you focus on the next things, let's recognize that, this is pretty heady stuff. You're talking about the U.S. entering an entirely new economic order, leading one. This is a complete undoing of a multilateral free trade environment. The world's largest economy, most powerful country, is putting unprecedented tariffs on everybody we've not seen in our lifetimes. So, there's going to be negotiations. There'll be some capitulation. There'll be some places that'll go full tit for tat. Most won't. But even if everyone was in deal mode, you would still be in a new world order. Because, remember, there are a whole bunch of countries out there where the United States is actually running a surplus with tariffs that are incredibly low. And Trump said, even on those countries, 10%, right? You've got countries out there that are incredibly poor, that provide commodities that America needs and can't get other places. They have no ability to buy American goods. And Trump said, 10%, right? So, the reality is that the purpose of these tariffs is not just to drive deals. It's also to force a reordering of how we think about global investment and make people recognize that the United States is where you need to be if you want to be doing business with the U.S., and there's going to be a cost to that.
Is this the end of globalism, Ian, or do you think, is there the potential for the rest of the world to kind of throw up their hands and say, we don't really want to deal with the U.S. in the same way that we have done in the past, and we're going to forge our own trade agreements, and if America eventually wants to be a part of them, that's all great, but if not, then we're going to do business with each other and see how the U.S. likes it?
Well, there are two ways to answer this. The negative response is that for the last 20 years, there have been a lot of people that have talked about a de-risking from China because China doesn't have rule of law, they're opaque, the state makes decisions that can be arbitrary and capricious, they don't respect intellectual property, all of those things. So everyone's talked about how they can de-risk from China. I have had so many phone calls with leaders of governments and with companies all day today about de-risking from the United States. So you are now, that is the new term of art, and countries and companies around the world are going to find ways to try to reduce costs and get risk out of their system by having less exposure long-term to the U.S. market. That's the bad news. The good news is that the United States is in a position of great power. And there are lots of ways that you can't de-risk from the United States. So look at the hyperscalers, look at the big technology companies. The Europeans are not going to now say, how do we go crush Meta, or Google? And why not? Because they can't replace it with anything. There's no substitution effect. The Japanese can't say, oh, let's go do a deal with China and coordinate with the Chinese against the Americans, because the Japanese can't leave the American security umbrella. So there are a lot of places where you just need to keep working with the U.S. no matter what. And of course, the size of the American market is important. It's not as big as the European collective common market, but it's still pretty damn big. And so ultimately, there are a lot of countries that are going to try to find ways to get along with this new environment, however arbitrarily and unilaterally driven by President Trump.
Ian, what about China specifically? Because I saw headlines today, they're already talking countermeasures if the U.S. doesn't cancel these tariffs. What could countermeasures actually look like? What do you actually expect to see from Beijing?
Well, I'll tell you what I don't expect to see. I don't expect a TikTok deal to get approved by the Chinese anytime soon, because why would they be making a give to the U.S. when Trump is throwing a three handle on top of these new tariffs? And he's saying, well, maybe I'll take a point or two off. I mean, we are very, very far from a breakthrough from a U.S.-China, sort of new Nixon environment, no matter how many people are speculating on it. But the Chinese economy is performing poorly. They weren't going to hit their 5% growth number even before Trump came to town. They're having huge problems with consumer demand and consumer sentiment. They're having huge problems with regional indebtedness, with all of their provinces essentially in receivership. And that gets much harder when the Americans not only hit China, but also hit all the other countries that are passed through from Chinese exports into the United States, like the Philippines, like Indonesia, like Vietnam, right? So when you add that up, the Chinese, yes, they need to respond, and there will be a response. There will be retaliation, but it will not be tit for tat. Where the Chinese can really retaliate is by taking advantage of American lack of interest in leadership. The fact that the Americans want to be unilateralists, the Chinese will be like, great, you want to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord? We'll be the drivers of post-carbon energy transition. We'll be the most important country at the COP summits going forward. U.S. wants to leave the World Health Organization? Great, we'll be the most important country in the World Health Organization. We'll call the shots there. If the U.S. wants to stop paying dues for the UN, great. We'll be the most powerful country with influence over the United Nations. U.S. wants to stop spending on USAID, great. We'll be the most important across the world in the global south. Myanmar has an earthquake. Remember when Indonesia had the tsunami? The Chinese failed. The Americans had boots on the ground. Myanmar has a massive earthquake and thousands die. The Americans do nothing, and the Chinese are on the ground. So reputational power, soft power, diplomatic influence with countries around the world, the Chinese see themselves as long-term beneficiaries of what the Americans are doing right now, and that is an opportunity for them.
Long-term Treasury yields have been coming down, and I'm sure the President and Treasury Secretary are happy with that. Any thoughts at all about whether China, which has a pretty significant stake, holdings in Treasuries, would they risk hurting themselves to unwind in a dramatic fashion some of those Treasuries to try and maybe push bond yields back up as a sort of retaliatory move? Your question was in a dramatic fashion, and the answer is no. The Chinese are thinking long term. Their responses are going to be incremental. They don't want a crisis. They want to see how this shakes out for their own economy and as well as for their relations around the world, and they want to move carefully. The term for it in China has always been, when you're walking along a river, when you're crossing a river, cross slowly and feel the stones with your feet because you just don't know where you are. That's what they're going to do here.
Ian, always appreciate your time and analysis, sir. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.